challenged, uncomfortable, anxious and uneasy, and at times full of fear. Early on, I remember being in the store with my husband and seeing all of the empty shelves. I'd never seen anything like it, except in post-apocalyptic movies and zombie flicks. I felt the unease rising inside my chest, get stuck there, and then start to grow, pushing outward until I felt like I might explode. Before I was in full-on panic mode, I remembered those lines in the song, "Empty your mind, be shapeless, formless like water. We design the waves we give." I knew I could remain rigid and resistant, frozen in fear, or I could be like water. I could relax into the flowing energy of change, of emotional upheaval, of not knowing. So I took a moment to get still and breathe, feel the intensity of my emotions, observe them without judgment, and then try to let them go. I began to calm down as the stress reaction in my body slowly faded. I had learned my first big lesson of living in the time of coronavirus. A brain on fire can be cooled by the waters of mindfulness. COVID has given me a lot of practice in the art of getting still amid external and internal chaos. It has also given me unexpected opportunities, as the Buddhist Lama Elizabeth Munson describes. She writes, "We must hold still in the midst of our burning thoughts, our anxieties, our fears, and our emotions. We must remember to settle into our bodies and allow them to do the knowing, the resting, the connecting to the earth beneath us. We have a chance now, while the world is stilled, to feel the wind and the sun, to walk outside in the rain, to notice the small yellow faces of dandelions emerging from the mud. We have a chance to remember what matters in this fleeting, fragile life, our connections, our loves, our families, friends, communities, and our host, this endlessly beautiful and constantly changing earth." The slowing down that Munson mentions is another one of the lessons and gifts that I received from the pandemic. More specifically, I learned that slowing down doesn't have to mean contracting or retreating or bowing out from life. In fact, for me, it has meant expanding, broadening and deepening my relationships with nature, with spirit, with other people, and with myself. Downtime from what seemed like 1,000 commitments, and more recently, free time resulting from losing my job, has given me the opportunity to think about what truly brings me joy and the time to do more of those things. Things like reading, meditating, taking more walks, journaling, learning to draw, listening to more music and podcasts, learning to read tarot, and just sitting on our deck listening to the summer songs of our neighborhood birds. I'm even trying to grow and learn more about different houseplants, despite my long history of killing every plant I've ever owned. I've come to value and love these things, and I know I need more balance in my life. The universe has tried to teach me this lesson before, time and time again, finding ways to remind me that there are no special awards handed out for being the busiest or most stressed out person. I'm trying my hardest to make sure that this time the lesson sticks. My personal community has also deepened and expanded during COVID. I've met new people who joined causes and groups I belong to because meeting on Zoom now gave them the flexibility to attend. Some of these people have become great friends, part of my chosen family. I've been able to attend workshops that I never would have been able to attend if they were held in person as originally planned. The technology of Zoom brought those workshops into my home, giving me the chance to learn more about everything from anti-racism to developing my intuition. One conference had people from 51 countries in attendance, an experience I never would have had if the event weren't held online due to the pandemic. In short, I learned that building community doesn't have to stop because we can't meet in person. In fact, it can even thrive. All of these lessons and opportunities I've mentioned so far are beautiful and wonderful silver linings to the dark cloud of coronavirus. And it would be easy for me to get lost in this beauty, to set up shop inside my inner world and focus on my own joy and happiness. But the reality is that we can't ignore what is taking place in the world around us. COVID delivered one too big to miss lesson to all of us, that injustice and the need for us to respond to it does not stop, ever. Oppression, inequity, racism, they all continue their insidious, steady marches onward, pandemic or no pandemic. Here are some facts we can't ignore. During COVID, the unemployment rate has spiked for all racial groups, but is especially high for Black Americans. Fewer than half of all Black Americans had a job in April and May. The poverty rate for Black families is over twice that of white families. And CDC data from June shows massive racial disparities when it comes to COVID. The share of African Americans among all people with COVID is almost twice as high as their population share. A long and well-documented history of systematic discrimination against Black people regularly leads to them having worse underlying health conditions, making it more likely for them to become severely ill during this pandemic and die from the disease. Then we have the horrific police killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and others. These are but the most recent manifestations of injustice towards Black lives in this country. They're the awful, brutal sparks that set off a powder keg of protests across the world and ignited widespread support for the Black Lives Matter movement. We are facing what Lonnie Bunch, Secretary of the Smithsonian Institute, calls the dual pandemics of coronavirus and systemic and structural racism. It's a sentiment shared by the president of the American Psychological Association, who on May 29th released a statement saying, "We are living in a racism pandemic." According to the APA, racism is associated with conditions such as depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and substance abuse disorders, and it can contribute to the development of cardiovascular and other physical diseases. In fact, systemic racism is so deadly that dozens of public health and disease experts came forward to support the ongoing protests despite the dangers posed by COVID. In an open letter, they wrote, "White supremacy is a lethal public health issue that predates and contributes to COVID-19, and that the risks of congregating during a pandemic should not keep people from protesting racism." In the New York Times op-ed, Dr. Stephen McDonald, an assistant professor of emergency medicine at Columbia University, said that the protests are essential to America. They're necessary for the recognition and eradication of injustice. These protests, he writes, are the first dose of medicine needed to rid the system of metastatic racism. Hearing and knowing this, I wanted to join those taking to the streets demanding justice. But I ended up attending only one local protest in Easton, where we politely chanted and walked around the city center circle, going really nowhere at all. While it's had its powerful moments, it wasn't the protest I quite imagined or longed to participate in. But because I have regular, close interactions with older and medically vulnerable people, including my parents, I feel obligated to take precautions and limit my exposure to help keep them safe. But this left me feeling anxious and guilty about not doing enough. I also had, I cringe to admit, a bit of FOMO, fear of missing out. But I had the same choice I had in the store a couple months earlier, but the negative self-talk, guilt, and anxiety fill my mind with sticky, slow energy, gumming up everything and leaving me overwhelmed and unable to do anything. Or I could step back, take a breath, and release myself into the flow so I could find my way through to a more clear-headed space. It was from this clear-headed space that I remembered what I already knew, that protesting is not the only way to seek out and demand justice. There are other ways to get involved, so that's what I resolved to do. I connected with an organization called Free People Strike, which gave me an opportunity to use my white privilege and put my body on the line in a different way than on the street protesting. I instead took part in a hunger strike from my home that was aimed at freeing medically vulnerable people from Pennsylvania state prisons. I also became a core volunteer for an Allentown Latina woman running for state office, and in the process have been working on local voter suppression issues. Most recently, through my work with the organization March on Harrisburg, I joined the state coordinating committee of the Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign, which, along with starting seminary, is one of the most exciting things in my life right now. There's no shortage of ways we can get involved while staying safe in our own homes. I know many people in our church are already doing this. But if you're called to a cause and feeling stuck, I want you to know that there are opportunities out there. We can join local organizations like Lehigh Valley Stands Up and Power Lehigh Valley, who are actively doing anti-racism work in our communities and who are meeting by Zoom. If we're employed, we can look at our specific positions in our careers and reflect on what power we might have to promote diversity and equity. If I'm a manager, I can ask myself, have I promoted or hired people of color? If I'm a teacher, I can ask, have I incorporated messages of racial diversity and civil rights into my curriculum? And we can all ask Google for ways to channel our anger that don't include protesting and receive article after article of ideas. We all have roles to play. We all have roles we can play that fit our corona constrictions. We just need to seek them out. Most importantly, we can all remember that most of us have the choice in how we react during this unprecedented, unpredictable, and often frightening time. We can be rigid like a deer caught in the headlights, frozen in fear, or we can be like water and design the waves we give. When change arrives, we can flow.